this?
Yeah. You're recording over
Work. It's an effort to expand our audiences, to find a real world audience. It's an opportunity for us to get out there on the internet and shape the world. So we hope you enjoy this Tigers Talking on the Prairie.
Hi, I'm Julio. I'm here interviewing Kristen about her narrative essay story. What process did you go through writing this story?
The process I went through is trying to find, some memories or whatever to talk about. Narrative essay I wrote was about the demolition derby in Rocky Ford, Colorado. I just kind of picked out some of the major points that I went through during that night, and that's how my narrative essay came about.
Okay, here she is. She will tell you a little bit about her narrative essay.
Okay. It's that time of year again, a hot summer night at the Arkansas Valley Fair, Demolition Derby. As we wait in line to pay for our wristbands, all you hear is the sound of cars, trucks being revved up to be worked on. We're all anxious to be out of the truck and in the pits, but the line is long. Finally, we get to the gates and received our wristbands. Mark and I jump out of the truck and go to where Mike and the crew are. There are cars in every direction you look, people running back and forth to their cars. All I can think is, wow, I've never seen so many beat-up cars in my life. When we got closer to Mike and his crew, all you could see is them running back and forth with different tools. They have to make sure the car is ready and make the standards that are required. Mike's dad, Gary, is at the bottom of the car welding the fenders, and his brother Gary is hitting the hot fenders with a hammer. In the demolition derby, it is best to have your fenders pointed up, so when you get hit, the fenders will go into the trunk rather than down and rub against your tires. When Mike's dad welded one of the fenders, it wouldn't fall down, so Gary kicked it with his shoe. Gary was only wearing thin tennis shoes, so when he kicked the hot metal, it melted his shoe and cut open his foot. Sandy and a few other girls that were part of the crew rushed Gary over to the EMTs. Come to find out, his foot was cut open so deep that he had to go to the hospital. Some of the girls drove him down to the Arkansas Valley Regional Medical Center where he could be treated. After a while, the car was finished and was ready for the derby. Over the intercom, Mike and the other drivers were called to the pit. As nervous as Mike was, you could tell he was ready and excited to be out there. In the demolition derby, you are required to wear a helmet, so when you get hit, your head is protected. After the Star-Spangled Banner, the drivers are allowed to park into the pit to park. I was so anxious and nervous for the outcome. You never know what is going to happen in the derby. Every year there's something new, like a wreck, someone hurt, or even a car blowing up. Everybody is quiet and waiting for the gun to be shut off. That long moment of waiting makes you even more anxious and nervous and anxious, even though it was Mike's second year running in the derby. I still had some mixed emotions about it. A minute passed, and another passes by. Finally, the gun was shut off, and all you see are all the drivers and cars take off. Dirt was flying everywhere. The sound of metal smacking together occurred. Everybody in the crowd cheered with excitement every time someone hit someone else's car. After a while, the drivers hit each other. Another driver pulls forward, then back up, flooring his car. Mike was trying to get away. About that time, the other drivers backed right into his car. The other car had so much force behind his hit that Mike's car ended up flipping over onto the roof of the car. I was never so scared in my life until that moment. Nobody knew if he was going to get out before anything major happened to the car. Nasty thoughts just floated in my head until we saw his hands up in the air, letting everyone know he was okay. I didn't think Mike was going to get out of the car. I have never been so terrified in my life. After the first round, I headed back over to where we were all parked and waited. I kept saying to myself, I hope he's okay. Please let him be okay. A guy with a loader came over to the area and dropped off his car. Soon after that, Mike and the rest of the crew came back and had the guy raise his roof back to normal. After he raised the roof, everyone went back to work. I didn't know what to do or how to help mechanic the car. Luckily, Lisa was there, and I was able to conversate with her. You know, if all of us women worked on the car, we would have it fixed and ready in no time. She commented, I never laughed so hard in my life. But in the back of my mind, I knew she was right. Mark was inside of the car fixing all of the wiring while everyone else was trying to get the car to start again. I wore my hair up in a ponytail. Luckily, I did that not because I was able to contribute to the car. Kristen, would it be okay if we use your rubber band in your hair? Gary asked. At first, I was debating if I should or not. I mean, I didn't really want my hair to look like a mess, but I figured why not? I never knew anybody could fix a broken part with a ponytail. At that moment, I knew I did the right thing because everyone there thanked me. If it wasn't for your hair tie, I don't think this car would be running, commented Mark. I never felt so proud of myself for allowing myself to look like a mess for someone else. About that time, Gary gets a call from his other son saying he was headed back from the hospital and asked what happened. Gary was more sad that he missed his brother getting rolled than getting stitches on his foot and having to use crutches. After he got off the phone, he went back to working on the car. I didn't know if the guys were going to get the car done in time. While they were working hard, Sandy and I walked over to watch the rest of the cars and trucks on the Derby. I have never been so interested in watching trucks smacking each other until that night. I was really amazed by how many people actually participate in such a sport. After the trucks and mini cars were done, they had a 15-minute intermission. So Sandy and I walked back over to the guys to see if the guys had the car running perfectly, and it was ready to go. The guys were cheering, and I couldn't figure out why until we got to the car. That's right, the guys had the car running and in good shape. I honestly didn't think Mike was going to be able to go into finals. After the intermission, the announcer called the final group of cars to the arena. Mike jogged around to the lineup while the rest of us walked over to the front gate to watch Mike. I was nervous but excited for the last round. It was the finals, and if Mike won, he could go to the state fair in Pueblo. The drivers got to the arena and lined up where they were supposed to. Again, we were all waiting for the gunshot to go off and for the cars to start smacking into each other. When I least expected it, the sound of the gun went off and the drivers started smashing into each other. The countdown began. One car, then the second, the third, and so on. Mike was headed in to get this one guy, but he stopped on his brakes, and Mike ended up going out of the side. He may not have gone to state, but he did make it to finals. I have never been so proud. Come to find out, the guy who flipped Mike ended up flipping 5 drivers that night. I always wanted to be in the Derby, but after that night, my whole perspective changed. I think I will just stick to watching all the action rather than being in it. Hi, I'm Kristen Bitter, and I will be interviewing Isaiah Casillas. So Isaiah, tell us a little bit, how did you get the process to write your narrative story?
Just hanging out with family and going on trips together as a family.
Can you tell us about your narrative essay?
I'm going to tell you about my trip to Las Vegas, New Mexico. First, we were sitting at my grandma's house, and one of my aunts told my family, let's go to New Mexico. So then everyone thought about it and said to each other, let's go. First thing we did is looked on the internet to see what's there to do. When we looked to see what we're gonna do there, there's a page that said Fiesta Day that weekend. When we clicked on the page, we all thought it looked cool, so we were going. So then after we found some other things that we could do to keep us busy when we were up there, we left my grandma's house. The next day, it was a Friday, when we met at my grandma's house again to see when we were leaving. So we talked to see what time we were leaving and what day. We were planning on leaving. They decided to leave that night. We could be there in the morning after. After that, we went home to pack. Around 2 p.m. when we left. Leaving to New Mexico, we had to go to Trinidad. Everyone was starting to feel a little hungry, so we stopped and grabbed a hamburger and a pot and whatever else we could find. just to hold us until we got to Raton, New Mexico. So when we left Trinidad, it took us 2 more hours to get to Raton. 2 hours went by and we got there. When we got to Raton, we stopped and grabbed us something else to eat. It was around 6. So we had 1 more hour to get to Las Vegas, New Mexico. So we finally left. An hour later, we were in Las Vegas, New Mexico. We were so happy we were already there because it was a long drive from Lahaina. After we looked around till midnight because it was over, we slept, woke up, then we went back and did the same stuff over. And around 6 p.m. we left back home, and that was my trip to Las Vegas, New Mexico. My name's Isaiah Casillas. I'm going to interview Julio Greger about his narrative story or essay. What process did you go through writing this story?
Some of the process that I went through is telling a little about my experience of going to Mexico and how that turned out, and meeting all my new family and cousins that I never met before.
Okay, now can you tell us a little bit more about your narrative essay?
I was inspired to write the story because it was the first time in 7 years that I've seen my auntie and uncles, all my cousins. So this is my side of the story of going to Mexico. When I went to Mexico, I was very young. I think I was only 4 or 5 years old. The reason why me and my family were going to Mexico was so we could go see my aunties and uncles. My grandpa's family is up there. He was born and raised here. Raised there. His sisters and brothers were up there. When I found out that we were going to Mexico, my mom and I went home and started packing for the trip. When we were all done packing, we went to my grandma and grandpa's house because we were all going in one car. At that time, we had a van. So when I got to my grandma's house, they were still packing. We didn't leave until the next day in the morning. I think it was about 4:03 in the morning. On our way up there, I asked my grandma how long it would take to get up there, and she said about 13, 14 hours. When we were about to enter Mexico, we had to go through a border where there was a long line of people going and coming back. A guy came up to the car window and asked what our purpose for going to Mexico was. My grandpa told them his brother and sisters live up there. The guy looked up and said to move on. We got into Mexico. Everything looked different from where I was born and raised. My grandpa was the one driving, so he knew where to go. We had to go through the town of Mexico. I got town of Mexico to go to my grandpa's family house. We were driving. I was looking at some of the buildings that were there. They looked so old and broken down. There was very very stores. There, from what I remember, my grandpa took a turn off the streets there and went on a dirt road. I asked him, why did we turn? And he told me that this was the way to go to his sister's house. When we arrived there, my grandpa got down and knocked on the door. All my grandpa's family came outside. They were all happy and surprised to see my grandpa again. We were in Mexico for a week. It was a long day and night there. It was different sleeping in a different place from mine. My grandpa and all his sisters, brothers, were all at the lake. We were sightseeing. I also went to my grandpa's family store. There were so many different things: candy, pop, and ice cream. It was a kid's heaven. I can remember when I was there. We went to a place with a lot of land and trees. It was a beautiful place to be. They also had apple trees there. I remember going over to the trees and picking some apples and eating some. I thought I threw some around. One of my grandpa's family members gave him an old carriage wheel. It was unique. That was very old after being there for a week. We all picked up and got ready to leave back home. Everyone went outside and said their goodbyes. Their hugs. Some of my grandpa's family were crying and sad, but we pulled out of the driveway. Wait, everyone was waving goodbye.
Hi, I'm Kristen Bitter, and I will be interviewing Brendan Gonzalez over his narrative essay. So, Brendan, what process did you go through to write your narrative essay?
Well, I've struggled trying to remember the whole experience, but most of it I remembered clearly. And yeah, it's about how I got my license.
Okay, well, would you like to read us your story to let us know how you got your license?
Sure.
Okay.
The title of the story is My Experience on How I Got My License. The feeling of having my license feels more like freedom. I can now go anywhere I choose, as long as I have the right amount of gas and do more now. It does feel good, but in a way, I think that if I had a job, I could put in gas as much as I need to drive as much as I please. But all in all, getting my license wasn't as easy as I had expected it to be. It started back when I was about a year ago when I was 16 and a half. I decided I would go ahead and finally take the test for my permit since I've held it off for over a year already. So to get ready for the test, I had my mom get me a booklet on all the rules and laws and know-hows on how to drive. It didn't interest me a bit at all, so I just skimmed through the booklet and felt a little overconfident at the time, thinking that I can remember it all. So as I took my first attempt at the written test, I figured that I would pretty much fail big time since I didn't recognize any other questions on the paper. I had missed 8 questions that I had guessed on. That was my first attempt, so I decided to try again just to give it another go. One thing that I didn't know was that the tests were different, so I had just as much trouble with the second one as the first. Luckily, though, I knew some of the questions and got them right. But as I finished, I handed the instructor my test, and to my unluck, she marked off 6 questions and I failed again. It felt humiliating from failing twice in a row, but also helped me get inspired to read the booklet and actually succeed in getting my permit. So I studied more, and then after a while, I decided to take my third test for my permit. As this was my third time, I wanted to actually finish this one instead of failing yet again. So time went by as I did the test, and as I finished, I walked to the administrator and instructor, more nervous than ever, and as I saw her mark off only 4 questions, I felt extremely relieved that I had finally passed my test. All that was left to take was my picture and pay for the permit. Now was the time to practice how to drive. Easier said than done, I would say. I started out practicing out of town, out in the country. I thought it would be easy until I kept on pressing on the gas harder than I should have. And that gave me a little adrenaline rush. But soon enough, I got the hang of accelerating after a few times doing it. And so the next thing I had to figure out was how to brake properly. It frightened me at times when I tried to slowed down and accidentally stopped harder than I should have. But after a while, I got a hang of it, and at first, when I was driving, I would only go to around 45 miles an hour because I get frightened to go any more. But then after a while, I was getting the hang of it, and it caught up to me. The weeks and months went by, and I was getting a lot better. Maybe my hardest test was driving back from New Mexico to Pueblo. I'd say that I drove about 180 miles through that day. In total, it was about 3.5 hours of driving with only a couple breaks. The breaks were slim timing, but it got me rested enough. Oh my God. So, since I got back to, when we got back to Colorado, on our way to Pueblo, we were on a freeway, and I was averaging around 85 to 90 miles an hour on the road. It was exciting at first, but I always kept on getting warning signs from my mother for going too fast, thinking that there were cops around there when there weren't. In total, it was almost another hour of driving that really put a toll on me. And after that, I finally got my hours required to take my driving test. And to my unfortunateness, I had to drive an SUV, and I wasn't really good at driving because it was so big. So every time I drove it around a curve or something, an instructor would tell me that I wasn't turning properly, but he still passed me in the end, even though mentioning every wide turn that I took, saying that I was partially in the other lane. But then I finally got my license and had paid for it and got my picture, and ever since then I've been driving as smooth as possible. And yeah, that's my journey on how I got my license.
This is Tigers Talking on the Prairie, a senior English project of La Junta High School, located in La Junta, Colorado.